She'd had some misfortune. She had 2 failed marriages by the time she was in 20, so she was a little bit leery of guys at that point in her life, but a friend had introduced her to Gerald on a blind date, and that's how they met.
A couple friends of her wanted her to meet this nice guy and took her to this bar or wherever he was working, and so they talked and met and so forth, and he took her home.
And said goodnight to her at the front door, pecked her on the cheek. She closed the door behind herself and leaned against the door and thought, hey, this is a sweet guy.
Within 11 months, Charlene and Gerald had married and moved 200 miles east to Reno, Nevada.
Reno, that area was a small town. It's grown tremendously since, but at that time, everybody felt safe. You'd let your children go to things, you know, that children normally go to carnivals and rodeos and fairs and things like that.
14-year-old Brenda Judd had grown up among the small rural Nevada communities.
To me, she was like an angel, you know. I mean, she'd always let me hang out with her, and she never told me no. She's awesome. She's close to perfect.
Brenda and her best friend, Sandra Colley, were almost inseparable.
Oh, she was a lot like Brenda. They were both very special little girls. They weren't the kind of young girls that give you trouble. When they would go somewhere, if they said they were going to be somewhere at a certain time, they were there.
On the 24th of June, 1979, Brenda and Sandra decided to go to the fair in Reno. It was just a year since Gerald and Charlene Gallego had moved to the town.
Brenda and Sandra had gone to ride some rides. Sandra's sister says, "Now be back at the gate at 9:30, because we got to be home by 10.
But Brenda and Sandra didn't show up.
We all met out there, and we called the police.
I had overheard my dad talking, and I heard him say something along the lines that they couldn't find her.
I had the most horrible feeling. I don't know why, it just scared me to death.
Everybody wanted to go look for her, you know. Nobody knew what had happened. No, it was scary.
My dad looked at me and he says, "They're still alive." And he says, if they weren't, them dogs would be howling up a storm. What he didn't know was the night I got home, I couldn't shut them dogs up. They howled all night long.
The key to the disturbing mystery would eventually lie with Charlene Gallego. Over a year later, the heavily pregnant 23-year-old would find herself on the run with her husband Gerald, following the disappearance of Sacramento students Craig Miller and Mary Beth Sowers. When Craig's body was discovered, Charlene's parents became concerned for the safety of their daughter and reached out to the authorities.
They notified the FBI. They set it up where they would wire money to a Western Union office in Omaha, Nebraska.
The FBI staked out the office until Gerald and Charlene came to collect.
The FBI took them into custody as they collected the money.
In custody, neither Gerald nor Charlene offered an explanation for the death of Craig Miller or to the whereabouts of Mary Beth Sowers.
Charlene was nothing like the meek and mild gal I met at her house. I talked to her for several hours just trying to get her to tell me where we could find Mary Beth, and she wouldn't give up a thing.
With Gerald and Charlene in custody, the search for Mary Beth Sowers continued.
We're out looking for Mary Beth every day. She's not dead. No, they'll find her. Yeah, she'll show up.
3 weeks after her disappearance, the mystery of Mary Beth's whereabouts would be solved.
I was home that night, and I received a call from our communications center. So I drove out here. It was dark, late at night. It was that field right out there. You could park down the road and walk in. Walked up, I recognized her dress. I knew that that was Mary Beth. That's where he shot her.
21-year-old Mary Beth Sowers had been violently sexually assaulted and her body discarded in a shallow ditch.
I was just devastated. That's as close as I could describe it. I just couldn't believe it.
She was going to get married, and she talked about having kids, and to be brutalized at a young age, and that's how she died. That's how she left this world. It was just horrifying to me.
It would be over a year before the details of Mary Beth and Craig's deaths would be revealed, when suddenly Charlene decided to talk.
On the first jail visit, after a long period of time, she said, I guess you wanted to know what had happened. And so she told us.
The tale of Mary Beth and Craig's murders was one of sordid premeditation.
I'd gone to the Arden Fair shopping center late one night, and they were waiting for somebody to abduct.
Craig and Mary Beth are heading towards their car when they're confronted at gunpoint. Gerald orders them both into the back seat.
After shooting and dumping Craig out of town, the couple took his fiancée back to their home.
They brought her back to the apartment right here. And according to Charlene, Gerald drugged Mary Beth into the apartment, took her straight back to the bedroom, and Charlene was left out in the front room to fend for herself. She laid there most of the evening or nighttime while everything was going on in the bedroom, just listening to what was going on.
I can't imagine what went on in their mind. Sick. I mean, who would do something like that?
Gerald sexually assaulted Mary Beth for the rest of the night, while Charlene lay on the couch.
She said that she dozed off and on while everything was going on in the bedroom. And then about the time the sun was coming up, Gerald drugged Mary Beth out of the bedroom, all disheveled, and they took her for a ride.
They then walk her out into a kind of a wooded area.
He tells Mary Beth to lay down. She lays down on her back and shoots her in the head.
After what she had gone through that night, she was probably relieved that it was over.
But this shockingly brutal confession wasn't the end of Charlene's story.
At that point, Charlene broke down and began to cry. I never forget the mascara around her eyes ran like a river down both sides of her cheeks. She began to tremble. She said, "You don't understand. This wasn't the first time." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "There were others."
Charlene Gallego would go on to reveal a diabolical murder spree that spanned 2 years, 3 states, and 8 more innocent victims. Following the brutal slaying of college sweethearts Craig Miller and Mary Beth Sowers, Charlene and Gerald Gallego were in custody. With Charlene willing to talk, she might hold the key to solving the string of violent murders that the husband and wife had engaged in.
It became clear to me at some point that you have to strike the deal with the devil. If you don't, then there's too many other victims, too many other people that go unanswered. Had there been another way to do that, I surely would have loved to have done it, but that didn't happen.
Prosecutors struck a deal. In return for her testimony, Charlene would be offered a reduced sentence. But no one was prepared for the horror Charlene would reveal as she took investigators on a chilling tour of the couple's hunting grounds and burial sites. Their depraved spree had begun in 1978, a year after they first met.
Gerald became impotent. He couldn't perform sexually. He no longer, with her, could have normal sexual intercourse, and so what he was doing is that he was looking for some fantasy that would satisfy him sexually.
The original plan was sex slaves. The way he proposed this whole thing initially was he wanted to be able to capture young women, take them to a location where he can keep them captive and use them as he wished. So she's sort of going along with this first, it's sex, it's not murder. Maybe that was what eased her into it.
The couple drove to a mall in Sacramento, and Gerald instructed Charlene to entice two suitable victims to act as his sex slaves. She identified 16 and 17-year-old friends, Kippy Vaught and Rhonda Scheffler.
She goes to them and she says, okay, we got some marijuana. You want to go smoke some marijuana with me? Okay, so sure enough, they go out to the van.
Charlene opens the side door of the van, and there he is with a gun, commanding them to come in at gunpoint, and they do, and they're caught. They're done.
With Charlene driving and Gerald in the back with the young girls, they drove